my God. What the fuck is this?
We now have
Anti-white racism is blatant in America. No one tries to hide it. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
have institutions that are putting in tests, you know, like the Harvard lawsuits restricting white people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they're explicit in why they're doing it. They're outright saying too many white people.
Yeah.
So too many Asians. So we're gonna change the structure so that we get rid of them. And then you've got corporations that flat out tell people, oh, you're white? Sorry, we're not interested. I'll tell you a quick story. We had a pro skateboarder on this show a few months ago. He was a gay man, and he's like, it's not really a big deal. He's like, I don't go around telling everybody, but he got approached by a friend who said, hey, they're doing a commercial for, I think it was a shoe company, and it's like Pride Month or whatever. Would you want to be in it skateboarding? And he was like, oh, wow, that'd be cool. And when they submitted his reel, the people running the commercial said, why did you send us a white guy? So here is a gay man for their diversity commercial, and they said white person.
Why'd you send us a white guy? Like, okay, just because he's gay doesn't mean he's not white. What the fuck?
And then we played the commercial. No white people in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think actually you've actually hit on a really important insight.
Tim Pool's talking about the Austin show here, by the way.
That a lot of people miss. And in fact, even people who've written on this issue miss. And an area where I differ a little bit from other folks who've written very good books in a slightly similar areas, guys like Christopher Caldwell and Richard Denania, kind of.
Richard Denania? Richard Denane is literally a straight up white supremacist, bro. He's Palestinian, but pro-Israel. And also, it is also literally a fucking dude who used to write like straight up Nazi shit back in the day. And his opinions haven't really reformed all that much, okay?
Written books about this is that I don't think the Civil Rights Act in and of itself is the totalizing thing that gets us to where we are now. In that, as you point out, these laws are on the books and they're just getting ignored.
Right.
It's in the culture, this type of discrimination. And it really helps when we have folks like Alliance who will actually call this out on lawsuits. But right now, a lot of this discrimination is illegal and it's been happening in plain sight.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I know. I think that's totally right. How did this happen? I'm not sure. It all happened kind of under the radar.
Yeah.
There was a lot of push for years.
Yeah, totally, dude. It's just this anti-white discrimination and systematized anti-white racism just kind of snuck in on us, dude. The war against whites, baby. It's real. How do we let this slip, guys? How do we let this slip under the radar?
And then DEI, I think, put it on steroids as far as this kind of racialized view of the world and a zero-sum game where, you know, my racial group has to win and yours has to lose. But a lot of big businesses, institutions, and college and university setting as well, adopted these things and nobody challenged them legally. But it is starting to change. Some of the Harvard decision.
Affirmative action was written by white people to benefit white people? No, that's not true. Affirmative action literally was written by a black Republican, but you are right about it being a Band-Aid solution. Affirmative action in and of itself is ironically a Republican policy. But the reality of it all is that affirmative action, albeit was in the direction of change and progress for some of the wrongs committed towards people of color, specifically black people, it just was always a Band-Aid. It never was like a real solution. Like Obamacare, Romneycare? No, not like Obamacare, Romneycare. Black Republicans at the time of the creation of the affirmative action were progressive.
From the Supreme Court was kind of the first real shot across the bow, but that's not a limited decision. I think it's going to result in a lot of these programs, which really are patently illegal and ultimately undermine the core promise of the U.S. experiment, which is we're all equal before the law, regardless of our race, regardless of our sex, regardless of our religious convictions. And so I think in the end, the arc is going to be long, but we're going to prevail against this.
Bro, this is so funny. Look at this chatter. For the fun time later, Top G, the fall of Andrew Tate. Brother, that was the video we just finished. Okay, we'll do this.
Because it's absolutely contrary to our founding principles, constitutional protections, and some existing laws and statutes as well.
Well, I see two paths on this road we're on, and I'm hoping we win. I think a strong component of it would require a Donald Trump victory and a Republican victory in November, considering the stakes of this election. But I I feel that if I would predict if we were to see a Democrat victory, you're likely going to see the expansion of this as what is written.
Yeah. The war against whites. If you see a Democrat victory, you will see the expansion of the war against whites, which is real, by the way. Is that a joke? How do you not know Jose? Chatter, I think you have to remember, I don't really watch a lot of YouTube. Like, I don't have a lot of time. And all the YouTube that I watch on the show. So sometimes if I don't really know a content creator personally, even if they're fucking dope, I often will stray away from watching their YouTube videos. And because, like, I don't want to upset them. I don't want to frustrate them. I don't want them to be like, oh, why'd you react to my fucking YouTube video? But usually outside of the 9 hours that I'm live every day, I often don't look at YouTube videos, which is further testament to the whole pre-watched allegations are being faulty. Cringe ass. Lord Gandhi 420. Blaze it, Gandhi.
Down in law is completely meaningless. You know, people point out, Donald Trump, he just got convicted in a court of law.
Yeah.
It's a jury.
What would be a good modern progressive version of affirmative action? It would be a world where affirmative action isn't a necessity at all, not even a fucking Band-Aid, because there would be no open wound to put a Band-Aid over. What I mean by this is a world where there is true material equality, a world where, like, the equality of opportunity principle that Americans love repeating is real. That would require reparations for the black communities specifically, okay, for the harm committed to them by the virtue of the color of their skin, whether it be redlining, whether it be lack of adequate funding for their schools, lack of adequate funding for their social safety nets in general, trying to solve this material inequality that festers in modern American society. And then there would be no need for reparations. The abolition of legacy admission too, obviously, that's another thing. And having a real system that values in a very holistic way all of the characteristics and qualities that a student brings to the table when making the assessment on whether or not someone is worthy of going to a particular college. Beyond that, I would say obviously free college education is a must too. Reparations will make race relations worse. Yeah, dude, racist people get real mad that black people get money. Oops, what are we going to do? You asked me what must be done, what would be the best possible way out of this, and I'm telling you what is just. I'm not telling you what is permissible, what is possible. I'm telling you what is just. This would be the beginning stages of justice, okay? But I do love that I can't even fucking explain a hypothetical or a possible different way out of this unequal structure, this unjust structure, without some dumbass fucking lib chirping, dude. Just freaking chirping and being like, nope, no way, Jose. Can't do that.
They agreed. And it's like, well, yes, in the Soviet Union, they had trials as well. No one takes them seriously. When we're looking at corporations that are outright telling people we won't hire you based on race, this happened to me actually, sort of. So I worked for a company called Fusion. They were hosting a big event with presidential candidates. I was one of their top paid correspondents. I am also a mixed race person, and news went out about the event they were doing and the hosts they had brought on to do it, and it was their top correspondents plus one outside contractor who was black. And so I'm like, hey, man, look, you don't got to come and ask me to do anything. Let me do my thing. Pay me my money. But I did ask the president of the company. I was like, couldn't help but notice you brought in all of the top paid correspondents and then a contractor, and then I'm not invited. And he said, you look too white. Just straight up. He said, you look too white. And I was like, well, I'm a mixed race person. And he was like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. And I was like, all right, well, at least he was straight up with me. And they paid me a lot of money. So I was like, honestly, like, I'm if it was something I was pursuing, like I had applied for it,
right,
I probably would have lost my mind.
Well, it's interesting, Tim, and I think your experience is really similar. And I was one of the first interviews I did about this book was Charlie Kirk, and Charlie, I thought, had something really interesting to say anecdotally because he talks to such a broad swath of people in the conservative movement.
Yeah, no, Charlie talks to a diverse, broad swath of people in the conservative movement. You know, you got like super rich white guys, and then you got like moderately wealthy white guys. I mean, he's got all different kinds of guys that he talks to. All of them are racist. Okay, even the minority populations represented in the broader conservative movement, most of them are wealthy. All of them are definitely racist. Okay,
movement. He says, when I talk with my older donors and folks like that, and they say, you know, I start talking about anti-white racism, they kind of freak out. They're like, oh, you know, can we even say that? Is that bad? Is that?
yeah, because they're not as fucking groped up, especially because the older people he talks to are literally not as invested in like the here's why that happens. Those older rich white guys that he's talking to, as opposed to the younger rich white guys that he's talking to, come from a different era where, one, they saw the civil rights movement happen, and more importantly than that, they probably have their material conditions pretty fucking on a solid foundation. They're gonna die soon. They already have money. They have disposable income. Their situation is not dire. Whereas younger people that Charlie Kirk talks to are coming into the workforce that is dramatically different, coming into an economic situation that is dramatically different. It is incredibly fucking volatile. Okay? And that volatility causes people to be way more fucking unhinged. That volatility causes younger generations to look for alternative reasons. Now, because of that endless seeking of answers, people will either look at like capitalism and the structures that bind us, the economic organization of society as it stands, the global economic order, or they look to other things. If you're a liberal, if you are a conservative, you have this idealistic notion that capitalism might have its faults, but ultimately it's like pretty good, and the alternative is much, much scarier. So clearly it can't be capitalism. It has to be some other shit. What is the other shit? Oh, it's these marginal aesthetic choices that corporations make in terms of trying to showcase how progressive they are, right? That's it. And that's precisely the reason why I think younger Republicans are like way more fucking groped up than even the older Republicans are. This doesn't mean that older Republicans aren't racist. Of course they are. Having said that, however, there is definitely a momentum among younger Republicans towards like, you know, I would say a warmer reception towards dangerous fascist ideology.
Make us racist. Whereas when I go on college campuses and I talk to young people about this, like young white people, they're like, yeah, this is the biggest issue we're facing. You know, thank you so much for raising it. So I think there's also a generation gap here where a lot of old people or older people, you know, even people like me or middle-aged, my generation, don't understand how bad it's gotten for younger people trying to make their way in the world right now on some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, are you guys seeing more and more lawsuits or more and more requests for lawsuits?
They're literally describing everything that I just mentioned. No, they're not lying, dude. The situation for younger generations, our generation and younger, the economic situation is dire, okay? It is. I'm 32 years old. I'm about to be 33. Anyone that's younger than me is in an infinitely more fucked predicament than myself. Like 75% of the wealth in this country is in the hands of the boomers, okay? Think about that. There has been no income redistribution, no wealth distribution in this country as a direct consequence of tax cuts over and over and over again. The wealth is trapped up there. Okay? It's crazy, brother. It is actually fucking crazy. So yeah, obviously, when you're in that situation, the situation looks pretty fucking dire to you. And that spells that spells trouble. It creates economic uncertainty. It creates fear and anxiety amongst the younger populations. And that creates a perfect environment for people to get swept up in a frenzy and start believing that it must be, I don't know, marginalized people that are at fault, that you are not getting what you are due. you are not getting the American dream.
The term diversity, equity, and inclusion is about egalitarianism, but recently, conservatives have turned it into a three-letter profanity. When Francis Scott Key Bridge fell 2 months ago, Baltimore's mayor, Brandon Scott, had to explain the disaster and outline the next steps. But as online clips of the 39-year-old Democrat in his city of Baltimore varsity jacket began circulating, the conversation around the bridge collapse shifted from Scott's emergency management strategy to his skin color. They said that this is Baltimore's DEI mayor. One viral post on X said that it's going to get so much worse, prepare accordingly. The term DEI dates back to mid 1960s as the social justice movements and legal shifts of the day began reshaping the halls of academia and corporate America.
Do you get what I'm saying?
There are more lawsuits being filed on the overreach of DEI now than there ever has been. I think the floodgates really opened with the Harvard decision from the Supreme Court a couple sessions ago. And so, I was just looking at an opinion the other day coming out of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where a program that has race preferences built into financial awards,
Is it though? Don't more college graduates make like 80K? Yeah, 80K at a time when things are incredibly expensive, especially housing, especially healthcare, especially the college education itself that you just paid for. Those are like the three major sectors that have become unimaginably unaffordable. Okay? That's the problem. You're making 80K, but you live in fucking Los Angeles where you're dumping, or any major market that you can get a job for 80K starting salary implies that you are probably in a fucking housing market that is unsustainable. You're probably dumping half of your paycheck, if not more, into rent. Okay? On top of that, a shit ton of that paycheck is going to go back immediately to paying off your student loans because college education costs have gotten out of control. God forbid you get into a healthcare situation, you get into an accident, then you're completely fucked. So 80K doesn't necessarily mean 80K anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? So people think like, oh, what are you talking about? Like our wealth has grown dramatically. People are making a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, not necessarily. Not really. And you also forget that you're getting 80K, dumping it into rent. Who's taking the money from your pockets? Is boomers. Boomers. If you're making 80K a year and you think that shit's good, boomers have millions of dollars in their fucking savings account, some of which is directly tied back to the real estate market. Now, all of that looks really good when you think about the GDP. There's just a lot more money circulating around in the American economy. So as far as numbers on the board, yeah, we look so much wealthier. We look so much wealthier than every other nation. And in many instances, in many respects, we are. It's just that money is not necessarily improving your living conditions beyond regular technological advancements improving your material conditions. Because obviously, the great expansion of technological advancements does definitely make a lot of quality of life adjustments in the positive direction. It's just that beyond that, things should be so much better right now. If you look back at economists that looked to the future way back in the day, maybe 100 years ago, it would have been unimaginable to think that people in the Western world would be working this long every fucking week. This many hours was seen as like an insane prospect, especially with automation. Think about how much more output you are responsible for as a regular worker because you're on your fucking phone and you can do all this shit. Things that you normally previously could only do on a computer. And even before the mass production of computers, people were working. People were still typing shit up. People were sending each other memos that they wrote by hand or by a typewriter. That is a genuine boon in productivity. And yet, none of the extra revenue that you are able to generate, that your corporations are able to generate, ever came back to you in the form of less hours worked or more pay for the amount of time that you put in. That's something you have to think about. That is why we always say, that is why at least Marxists look at productivity increases and recognize that wages have remained stagnant, especially in comparison to the skyrocketing of productivity in this country. In all countries, really. This is not a problem just in the United States of America. It's a problem across the board. It's gotten to such a it's become such a dire predicament that people are literally anti-technological innovation. We have become, ironically, the Luddites weren't wrong in this assessment. We've become Luddites, which wasn't necessarily a negative thing in general, but they too abhorred technological advancements because what they thought was it spelled trouble for the prospect of workers. And that's what we are right now. We are a nation of Luddites because we understandably look at technological innovation in the form of like AI, for example, and we see that as a mechanism of displacement. We worry that AI is going to displace the existing labor force, going to fucking kick us out of jobs. And in the process, a job that requires 10 people to do will now be done by one person. One person will be doing the job of 10. Maybe one person will be doing the job of 5, but they'll be working extra hours to make sure that they're doing the job of 10. That way, you fire fucking 9 people and you eliminate redundancy in the corporation. That's how it works. Huh.
The court said this violates federal law and against race-based contracting decisions. Another decision came out recently that struck down a federal program and the racial preferences they have for minority-owned businesses. And so basically, if you fell into certain racial categories or ethnic categories, you got favored preferential treatment under the program. And they said that violates the fundamental principle of equal protection before the law. So I do think that a lot of this stuff exists. It's pervasive. But I also think the legal decisions are going to go the right way. They're going to stack pretty quickly. You were saying before, Tim, about the things that are written are ignored in many ways. But what we're worried about is what's happening behind the scenes, what's shrouded. And one of the things that we're working on is the way in which the federal government is taking kind of the secrecy that's allowed within the banking system and using it and weaponizing that against people, totally legal businesses, weaponizing it against people for their constitutionally protected activities like speech and religion. There's a lot coming out on this. I testified at Congress on this a few months ago, where we were actually caught up in it as well, ADF, where I work, Alliance Defending Freedom, because the FinCEN, part of the counterterrorism kind of ecosystem at the federal level, shared a document with big banks saying, look, around the January 6th, activities, we want you to look for people who could be domestic violent terrorists. And they said, here's a list of hate groups, so-called hate groups, which is put out by all these far-left activists. We're on it. Lots of other Christian organizations are as well. And they're like, these organizations are, domestic violent extremists, or at least could be, and people who donate to them could be. And they're asking big banks to scour their records for people who give donations to groups like us, who use terms like MAGA or Trump or shop at Dick's Sporting Goods or Cabela's. Like this is really alarming stuff. So it's a whole government problem. Yeah. And there's a lot of manipulation of the kind of legal apparatus, especially the counterterrorism and criminal divisions in the federal government, to harm people's First Amendment rights. And so that's a real concern. And I think it's all part of the same package.
Yeah. And I think maybe part of the reason I'm a little less optimistic, and I mean, if I were totally pessimistic, I wouldn't have written the book, because I think there are things we can do. But I'm a little less optimistic because I think a lot of these things that we're doing to challenge the law are only as good as the people we have who are enforcing them. And so by that, what do I mean? You just touched on the Harvard Supreme Court decision, which says affirmative action is illegal in universities. So Missouri has a really excellent forward-looking attorney general. As soon as that happens, he cancels $16 million worth of race-based scholarships in the state. But I don't think any other state AG did it, right? Because nobody actually stepped forward and said, aha, I'm going to go use this. And then the kind of real black pill, if you will, is to look at California. So California has now twice at the ballot box outlawed affirmative action by race in its universities. If you look at the statistics for admission, if you really squint,
Greg Doucet
fun
responded.
time in my life. It was so bad that when I had sexy time, I couldn't even finish. I kept thinking about, what have I done to my life?
Bro, what are you talking about? This is about fucking how he couldn't ejaculate. You liar. I got excited. I got so fucking hype. You're a hypocrite. Hasanabi didn't bang, by the way. A police department staged a school shooting with zero warning to a classroom. Real brain dead thumbs. Nice. Dude, less than average Joe, you're still being fucking annoying, okay? Just take an hour off. You're just being annoying every day. Please stop.
You can maybe see a little bit of effect that outlawing has had,
Right.
but it ain't much.
This was that was funny. So
I'm not gonna lie. What was this video on you about? It's about how I'm a hypocrite because I made fun of the way he looks. Okay, listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. This shit is boring. Okay? There's only so much I can take of like a bunch of old ass divorced dads sitting around chirping about how white guys are under attack, white people are under attack. Get to the fun shit, okay? Give me something more than just like, oh, in all my times of working at the federal agencies, I saw white people under attack and I did nothing. It's like, all right, pussy, you should have fucking done something about it then.
So this you're referring to? I think this was what 4 or 5 years ago. They had an attempt to amend the Constitution of California to allow them to discriminate on the basis of race,
Right.
in public contracting and education.
Yeah.
I remember I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's like, excuse me, like a woke LA actress, and I saw that she had posted in favor of it, and so I immediately texted her and then ended up with a phone call, and I was like, so why do you think people should be allowed to discriminate against people based on their race? And she was like, well, no, this is to help, minorities.
Exactly.
And I said, what's like the population breakdown of California? Like what are the racial demographics? Let's pull this one up.
I think whites are like 38% or something, so they're a minority.
So 40% are Latino, 35% are white, 15 are Asian, Pacific Islander, 5% are black. And I was like,
No wonder fucking California is awesome, bro. Holy shit. For all of its faults and failures, Jesus Christ, thank God for fucking diversity. Jesus, Lord mercy. I'm doing my part, okay, by making California more diverse, being a part of the minority, okay? The white minority. I'm here, baby. I'm doing justice to the whites.
what's the breakdown? And then actually, let's do this. Los Angeles. I was like, so the racial makeup of LA is 48.7% white.
But that includes Hispanics there. Like the
dude. Mr. Race Scientist. Oh, that includes Hispanics, okay? They're not real white. Bitch, they're white. The fuck you mean? There it is.
DEI has now become a political football that is being hurled around expressly to hurt people, black people in positions of power and authority, pilots, judges, you name it. On X, the entrepreneur Mark Cuban went back and forth with Rufo about the meaning of DEI. After Rufo and the Canadian psychology professor cum culture warrior Jordan Peterson accused Cuban of being a rich liberal elite who panders to people from marginalized communities. I know DEI is a positive because I see its impact on the bottom lines, Cuban wrote. For decades, says Alan Berry, a University of Toronto sociologist whose research explores the cultural dynamics of race and racism, law, organizations, and social movements. DEI was a safe word, code for everybody. It emphasized cultural difference and inclusion and having different perspectives. There's a long history of that dating to the original Supreme Court decision on affirmative action in the late 70s.
Non-Hispanic numbers.
Well, it says 44.6 are Hispanic or Latino.
Right, because
of any race.
it's if you look that, it's adding up to way more than 100, right? Because
Right,
there's a certain
right.
number of Hispanics who self-identify as white. So if I had to guess, the white non-Hispanic number.
Oh,
is
right. That doesn't
probably
make sense,
half
does it?
that.
I asked her, I was like, do you think that in like these towns that in California that are predominantly white, do you think they're going to choose to be more or less racist? And she was like,
What?
well, I would assume more racist. And I was like, why would you want to give them the legal right to do so?
Right.
And she didn't have an answer. I feel like a lot of these activists just want to be racist. For real. I mean, that's it. I mean, like the outcome of amending the Constitution in the way they did, certainly at the state level could have some impact.
Right.
But there are counties that are predominantly white in California. There's the East, certain farming areas. And I'm like,
That's not how any of this shit works. Also, the certain farming areas are so funny. No, man, the majority in farming areas in California are not fucking white. That's only in your mind, okay? White people ain't farming, big dog. The fuck? I don't think there's ever been a point in American history, unless you're considering Hispanics to be white now, okay? But usually they're not the white Hispanics that are in the farming communities. But beyond that, dude, the notion that, like, you know, white people are farming out there is so silly.
like the reality is, I think if California changed the amendment, these overwhelmingly white areas would not implement racial laws to protect white people.
Right.
The other counties that aren't predominantly white would absolutely pass laws to harm white people.
Right. Well, the interesting thing on that ballot initiative in California was every politician in the state endorsed, at least all the Democrats did, which is everybody who has office. They outspent the proponents about 30-1 or something preposterous, and everybody thought that they were going to win. And they lost 56-44 while Biden was carrying the state with 63%. So I think the good news is that actually racially discriminating is sort of unpopular in America, at least when you sort of expose it to light. But the bad news is there's a lot of this stuff, and as you point out, a lot of this is coming out behind the scenes. And so, I think part of what I'm trying to do in the unprotected class is just to shine a light on it, to say, hey, this is going on.
According to the 2022 USDA Census of Agriculture, 95% of farm producers in the United States are white, which is about 3.2 million people. Yeah, that probably does not factor in migrant workers, which, let's see, farm workers, demographics. You said farm producers too, but let's see. Demographics from the National Center for Farm Worker Health, also from 2022. 2.9 million agricultural workers in the United States. They travel throughout the United States working as the backbone for the trillion-dollar agricultural industry. The majority, 70% of agricultural workers were foreign-born. 63% of all agricultural workers were born in Mexico. 42% of Mexican-born workers were from traditional sending states of West Central Mexico. 30% were born in the U.S. or Puerto Rico. 66% of crop workers were male and 34% were female. The majority, 78% of agricultural workers, self-identify as Hispanic. 32% of U.S.-born agricultural workers identify as Hispanic. Unless you're talking about the farm owners, that is not true. The majority, 62% of agricultural workers, reported that they were most comfortable conversing in Spanish. Does that make sense? Many who are considered farmers do not do the majority of the labor. There's a lot of jargon around agricultural workers and their demographics to suggest a higher amount of white people in the labor force. Yeah. Size and composition of U.S. agricultural force. In the 1950s, the number of farm workers was totaling 10 million. By 2000s, that had whittled down to 4 million, less than 4 million, 3 million. The U.S. agricultural workforce is long considered a mixture of two groups of workers. One, self-employed farm operators and their family members, and two, hired workers. Both types of employment were in long-term decline from 1950 to 1990, as mechanization contributed to the rising agricultural productivity, reducing the need for labor. Since 90, employment levels have stabilized. The reduction in self-employment and family labor through the 1990s was more rapid than the decline in hired labor. Hired farm workers make up less than 1% of all U.S. wage and salary workers, but play an essential role in U.S. agriculture. Does that make sense? The late night last night, or no? I hope it does. So I don't know where you're getting that number from, unless white just simply means like
we now have
any, all.
But the bad news is there's a lot of this stuff, and as you point out, a lot of this is coming out behind the scenes. And so, I think part of some people is, I think some of them like to be super intellectually purist and say, it's just the Civil Rights Act. It was really horrible. My view is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a response to real problems that were existing. I mean, there was segregation, there was racism, things had been improving, but it was not it was a blunt instrument to solve a very real problem. And I think it turned out to be too blunt. It took away too many freedoms over the long term. And even more importantly, the deep state / administrative state and future really dubious Supreme Court rulings and other things built on this and took it way away from what I think everybody would have wanted it to be in 1964. But having said that, I don't think you can tell this story without discussing the act. I don't think a lot of this happens without the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I think without seriously amending our civil rights laws, I don't think we can fix fully some of these problems.
But I also think that the left has made a calculated decision that they can, at least for right now, the best way to drive their agenda is through a lens of discrimination. So they have co-opted a lot of good laws, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and other state and local laws that are really meant to be shields to protect people from discrimination based on immutable characteristics that they have no control over and they shouldn't be deprived of jobs or other things because of. And they've decided to drive, an agenda through that and essentially say there's a point of view or a perspective that you need to bend the knee to, and if you don't, we're going to use this as a sword instead to harm you, to run you out of business, to litigate and make and
Oh, okay. This chatter actually sent a really good and valuable description, but got blasted by Fossabot for typing up a goddamn essay in the chat. What is it? PRzer. I was kind of on the. I was right. Producer in the United States agricultural policy is generally thought of as a farm operator. However, given the sometimes complex ownership and rental agreements of today's farms, the 2002 Farm Bill defines a producer for purposes of farm program benefits as an owner, operator, landlord, tenant, or sharecropper that shares in the risk of producing a crop that is entitled to a share of the crop produced on the farm, according to Wikipedia. So farm producers, 97% of the farm producers are white, as in like the owners of the farms are white, whereas close to 70% of the workers on the farms are immigrant-born, foreign-born, many of them specifically Latin American, Latino, Hispanic. 69% of hired farm workers interviewed in the fiscal years between 2015 and 2016 were born in Mexico. 24% were born in the United States. 1% were born in Puerto Rico. 6% were born in Central America, and a small portion originated from various other regions, including South America, the Caribbean, Asia, and the Pacific Islands. 83% of all farm workers were Hispanic. So that's the thing that a lot of people, that designation of producer, farm producer, agricultural producer is a very nefarious one, specifically done to I guess like go along with the narrative that it's like it's the white farmers, when in fact aside from the owner operator white farmers, many of the relationship that farmers have, and you see this in like Europe as well. Oftentimes people wonder like why farmer revolts are rather reactionary, right? It's because they're operating along class interests. They're capital owners. Anyway,
vexatiously and make your life miserable. Our clients deal with this all the time. We represented Jack Phillips from Masterpiece Cake Shop at the U.S. Supreme Court. We won that decision 7-2 back in 2017. He's still been sued today because other folks in Colorado didn't like the outcome of that decision and just took the non-discrimination law and decided to
The affirmative action decision, which provided non-whites and women unprecedented access to education and government jobs, has had conservatives scheming to undo the progressive win ever since. They only had to evolve the dog whistle language that had become a feature of the Republicans' race-based Southern strategy, a 60s-era propaganda blitz that saw Republicans promote racial segregation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement to secure white votes. This is how the term ghetto, welfare queen, and affirmative action itself came to be understood as fraught substitute words to malign black Americans as inherently undeserving, and how a not insignificant number of Americans came to recognize Obamacare as a totally different policy from the Affordable Care Act. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. And thanks for watching.